when I went into the refuge, I used holidays and I tried to make up the time, but I couldn't make up all the time. It was so much pressure. And when
Yeah.
I saw that, I just thought, yeah, this is why we need to do it.
And
Yeah,
those jobs
probably
are
done.
lifelines. That
Yes,
job is a lifeline
an
for that
absolute
person.
lifeline.
So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, so this afternoon I am joined by feminist, activist, campaigner, and the chairperson of Women's Aid, Alva Smyth, and also, I should add, a very good friend of mine, I would like to think, and the chairperson of Women's Aid. So, Alva, I'm absolutely delighted to have an opportunity to chat with you this afternoon. We will be discussing the piece of legislation that's in front of the Equality Committee tomorrow, Tuesday the 25th, which is the Organisation of Working Time Act Domestic Violence Leave Bill 2019, which, as you know, is a piece of legislation that Sinn Féin have been working on now for a number of years. And I suppose I just want to have a brief discussion with you about, one, why this legislation is important, why is it necessary, why now, and secondly, then, what other practical steps that we can take. There is, very unfortunately, because of the killing of Aisling Murphy, there is a conversation that has started now about violence against women and gender-based violence, and that has turned quickly from grief and anger, and a lot of anger. That has turned from grief and anger into expressions of practical support, and that's what we're hoping to look at, is, practically speaking, what can we do to support women? So that's the basis of our chat, and I'm delighted to have Alva with me.
well, thanks for asking me, Louise. I should maybe just say straight from the beginning that although I'm the chair of the board of Women's Aid, I'm not in fact involved in the operations, the running, the provision of the services, and there's incredibly expert people under their CEO, Sarah Benson, who do all of that. So if I don't have facts and figures at the tips of my finger, that's exactly why. But of course, I mean, this whole area, this issue is one that if I say it's close to my heart, it's because, like every other woman and girl in the land, it stalks me wherever I am. It's not something that you can ever forget. And that the risks that you run wherever you are as a woman, as a girl. And I think that's really important, because sometimes, people can also think that for older women like me, maybe that the risk, that your sense of danger and fear might diminish, but actually, it doesn't. And I think what that teaches me is that we have these habits that come from a lifetime of having to look over our shoulder, for having to think about our safety wherever we are, on the street, but also at home, as we know, and very sadly, and really that is so sad, and also in the workplace. So these habits are deeply ingrained, and it is a matter of some real concern and an awful lot of annoyance and anger to me, is that it is just taking decades and decades and decades for the penny to drop, that this problem of men's violence against women doesn't go away unless it is stopped, and unless we do the practical things that you're thinking of. So obviously, tackling the situation that women in the workplace find themselves in when they are enduring domestic violence at home, that's really important, and it's really very, very long overdue. And I must say that the unions, this is something that the trade unions have been working on themselves for quite some time, as well as the women's organizations. And I think at present, it's not rocket science. You think, why did we not think of this 20 years ago, 30 years ago? That you don't stop being that woman who brings her distress, her anxiety, her trauma, the injuries, whether they're emotional and psychological or indeed physical, into the workplace with her. Why do we not think that therefore employers and trade unions have to do something about this? Or indeed that because a woman is having this really, really bad time in her relationship at home, because she and possibly her children, if she has children, she also feels a danger for them. That in fact, having a job becomes in a way all the more important to that woman. Not least because it gives her some kind of independent security in her life, that if, as she thinks, the worst comes to the worst, and this, or indeed if she's feeling trapped, if she can get out of that relationship, that it means that she has that job that she can rely on, whatever it is, however big, however small. And it's also about her sense of herself, her confidence, her agency. This is not the person, this is me as my independent, strong self, because I think what the experience of violence from a partner does to you is it completely undermines your sense of your own agency, your own selfhood, your own power, I think, really. And I think those of any of us who've experienced it at any level know that that's what happens. I mean, how many times have we heard and have we been the woman saying, I didn't think it could happen to somebody like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And myself as a really strong woman, and then you turn out to be you yourself, I myself, you yourself, we ourselves turn out to be that woman. So it is not that it happens to someone else, it's that it happens to us, and it can undermine us in our sense of ourselves as strong, powerful women. And that is exactly, of course, what that violence is intended to do. It is about overpowering you.
Completely. And you talk about the working and being a woman in work, that gives you that bit of independence, it gives you that sense of yourself, it gives you that sense of empowerment. But your workplace can also be a site of torture and of trauma, because very often you will see that the perpetrator will know that the last thing you will want as a victim or a survivor is to have that visited on you in your workplace. And part of the reason for that is because it's not talked about. So that's one of the things we're hoping to do with this legislation.
And I think
that chat going as a workplace issue, because it's not something that happens over there to other people. It happens to the woman that's sitting beside you in the call centre, or to the person sitting beside you on the till at the checkout, or to the person sitting beside you at the boardroom table. At all levels it happens, and we need to bring it to the shop floor, get people talking about it so that they're not afraid of the issue.
The workplace yes, and it's very like the home in that sense, that we think of home generally, or we hope that home will be a safe haven for people, but we also know perfectly well from our own experience and that of other women that it can be a very dangerous place. Likewise with the workplace, it can also be a safe haven for a woman who's experiencing domestic violence, because it gives her somewhere that she can escape to in a way. And maybe if she's fortunate, and I think that the kind of work that you're doing now with this bill is about building that, where she can get some support, where she can get help, where they can begin to work out a bit of a safety plan with her, where her employers and her colleagues can actually help her in that regard. But it can also be that very dangerous place where where the violent partner knows exactly where you are, and doesn't only try and contact you and stalk you, but will start getting on to the people you work with, or even your employer. And, I think that the more that we raise the awareness and the very real understanding of the practical consequences of domestic violence among employers and managers and supervisors and all of the people that you'd be working with, wherever it is, the better, because they absolutely need to understand that this is not something simple. It's not that you come in and you say, I have a black eye. It is never just that, ever. It is not that he rang me once. It is never that simple. It is immensely complicated. And therefore, it needs real understanding and training. And what I would hope from a domestic violence right to have leave bill is that would be a very important lever in the bringing to awareness of employers. And there are other things going on as well that will help do that quite rightly. But we need to have action really from all angles on all fronts. And I see this bill as being so important because it is about placing the woman who is experiencing the violence right in the center. And it is about saying, what is it you need? And she's saying, I need protection, I need support, I need not to lose my job. I need to be able to take the leave to help me, myself, my family. But I also need you, my employers, to be aware that you have a duty of care to me as an employee. You have a duty of care to help me through this bad time. And I really do think that's really important. There was a survey done in Canada, and I think something like, I think it was 80% of those surveyed said that domestic violence had had a negative impact. They were people who'd had experience of domestic violence. 80% said it had a negative impact on their work and that it added to their anxiety and their fear.
It does. And what happens is, because I have some experience of this when I was a union official, so you'd have shop stewards that would come to you and they might know that there is a person on their shift or in their area who they believe is suffering domestic abuse. They may not know the extent of it, but they have an idea that it's going on. But when the subject is a taboo subject in work, you don't get to have that conversation. Nobody knows what to say, so people say nothing. And what happens then to the victim, to the woman, usually, not always, I have to say, but usually a woman, what happens in this instance to the victim is they use all of their annual leave. They use their annual leave for hospitals, for doctors, for solicitors, for guards, for all sorts of reasons. They use their annual leave. They then are into grace and favour arrangements. So they're asking for a day off here, a day off there. They get a reputation for being unreliable, which is not fair. They don't deserve it. They don't tell their boss because they fear their boss won't understand. Their boss is probably nearly grateful they don't tell them because they don't have the language and they don't have the tools necessarily there to help. So with this bill, it will mean that there's some time off. Oh, Jesus, that's not everything, right? There's a million things that are needed, but at least if you don't lose your job, when your world is falling apart, that you know you have that steady source and you have that.
It's extremely important, Louise. It's not everything, of course, in terms of the supports that are required, but it is very important in itself insofar as it puts down a marker that domestic violence is something which impacts on a person's life, the victim's life, right across their embeddedness in society. That you can't just say, well, actually, sure, she can close the door behind her, leave home, and then she can forget about it and go to work and she'd be grand. No, absolutely not. And that it is, and that's the first point it makes. And the second point it makes is that employers have a responsibility. And that, I think, is very important. And it is also incumbent on them, if I can put it like that in my academic-y little way, is to say it is incumbent on them to inform themselves. So it is also important for employers to recognize that it's not good enough anymore to say, oh, I don't know now, I don't know what to say about that. I would just like her to go now. And I just say, yes, grand, go. The people have to inform themselves and have to realize that this is an endemic problem in our society and it won't go away unless everybody makes the effort to understand what's happening and to take the practical steps. This is really practical. As I said, why were we not banging on about this 30 years ago, 35 years ago? Because it's so obvious. And I think
it's one of those things that it's very practical. It's very necessary. When I have experienced myself, as I say, as a union official, where this sort of leave would have helped. I know on at least one occasion, I think this leave would have saved a woman's job. Because what happens is when you don't turn up and you're not there, you get the reputation for being unreliable. And that's so, I mean, when everything else is going wrong, you then get that and you then have another worry, which is losing your job. And this kind of gives everyone the tools.
But that's also, women's jobs are often very precarious and part-time. And, you know, I think that it actually, it backs up very well our whole understanding that it is really important for women to have good, strong, firm jobs, not just to be the ones who are in there picking up the pieces in a precarious way, but that all those who are victims of violence, men and women, girls, whatever, should have that right. And all of that contributes to creating a culture in the workplace, which is much more understanding, which is much more humane. And I do think that one of the things that the pandemic has taught us, and it's taught us a lot of things, but one of the things it has taught us, I think, is that a little humanity is so important. Humanity is so important. We would never have got by had we not been understanding and kind on the whole to one another. And I think, you know, our workplaces have to begin to shift and to absorb that, because really, you know, when I think about it, when you realize what a woman or a man is going through in a violent relationship, really what they need most of all is for somebody to be kind and understanding and to say, what can I do to help you?
Yeah. And the purpose of this is, you know, I mean, we let's give employers the benefit of the doubt. I think a
Yes.
lot of them, they'll want to do the right thing. They don't have the language maybe,
Yes.
and they don't necessarily have that kind of statutory entitlement. Whereas now, in the HR, in the leave folder, if this legislation gets through, and I hope it does, and I hope we get
Yeah.
cross-party support for it, I really do. But if this is going to be in the leave folder with all of the other leave. So when you go to HR, they can't say, well, look, I'll ask them if we give you a half day.
Yes.
It's not a grace and favour arrangement. You have an entitlement, and you can say, I want to use my entitlement to this leave. And that means that, you know, you're not disrupting anyone, you're not taking anything that you're not entitled to, you're taking time off that you absolutely need, and it's being granted to you in a way that you don't lose money, because unpaid leave is fine.
Yes.
If your boss will give it to you, it's grand. But every day you don't work is a day you don't get paid. And for an awful lot of women, that can be the difference between being able to stay out and having to go back. And that is the absolute key. And I know a woman contacted me this morning on social media, and I won't say her name, but she said, I hope this gets done. When I went into the refuge, I used holidays and I tried to make up the time, but I couldn't make up all the time. It was so much pressure. And when I saw that, I just thought, yeah, this is why we need to do it.
And those
Yeah,
jobs are lifelines. That job is a lifeline for that person.
Yeah.
I mean, I do, and I think you're right, actually, to say about giving employers the benefit of the doubt. In fact, I think we already see some very good examples from employers anyway. And I don't think that there's any disagreement. Cross-party, employers, workers, I don't think anybody actually disagrees with this. The real key is, can we do it now, please? Because we have now been talking about it. This bill has been on your stocks for quite some time, Louise, and it really is about time that the Oireachtas says to itself, okay, here is something practical, ready to go. It's ready-made, ready to go. Let's go with it. You know, there's so many very sincere words spoken over the past week since the murder of Aisling Murphy, absolutely sincere and heartfelt. But the time now is to say, well, we do have to see the action. We want to see what laws are coming in, what practices, what trainings, what investment, what funding. And we're not going to be, those of us who have been campaigning on these issues, like yourself and myself for many years, we're not going to be put off now at this stage by saying, well, we hope to do this in a year's time. Not good enough. Look how fast the government was able to move at the beginning of the pandemic. And thank goodness they did with the PUC, you know, and give them credit right across the line there. This is an endemic problem. It is everywhere. It is huge. Let's see that kind of swift, urgent sense, that sense of urgency with our current elected members and government now.
Yeah, no, you're dead right. There is cross-party agreement. I think that we need to do something. Everyone's saying we need to do something, and it can't be just words. And last week in the Dáil, and it was mostly women that spoke. And to be fair, because I know there was commentary about, oh, she was all women. It was mostly women, but that was in some instances, that was our male colleagues standing back and saying,
Yes.
well, you go forward. I'm not going forward. You go forward. So there was a lot of women, and we shared our stories and we did that. And you taking that bit, that should be private, putting it out into the public domain, right across all parties. It's really tough. And I think collectively, from talking to other women in the Oireachtas, we're kind of saying now, all right, that was last week, and see this week now, we want to see something practical coming out of this, because I'm not taking that private part of myself, that part that might be hurt or traumatized. I'm not speaking necessarily for myself personally, but we as an Oireachtas are saying we're not taking that bit of ourselves, putting it onto public display, saying everyone, look at this now, look at me, look how awful it is, and then just only to wrap it back up, put it back inside and go, well, we'll move on now, and nothing happens. I think we're all saying, I'm not going to keep doing this.
The emotion that comes from hearing about those personal experiences, of course, a very important motivator for people in politics, as it is everywhere else. But we do, I have this sense that all of those of us who are attending the vigils, there was like a kind of a backbone of steel there. We are desperately sad. We are extremely upset. And this time we are not going to lose hold of that. We're not going to let that disappear. We want to see that action. I was thinking myself, actually, that what I would love to see is the 124 male TDs, plus actually the senators, now I come to think about it. But I'd love to see a photograph of that mass of 124 male TDs saying, every single last one of us is up for all of this legislation. We really want to take action. I love them standing back to give women space, and may they stay well back for as long as possible, by the way. You don't have to say that, I can say that. But I want to see them moving forward on violence, men's violence against women. We need to see that. So I will probably send a little postcard into everybody and say you're invited to a photo call. Well, I might not, but maybe somebody else will.
I think that's a good idea, and I think you're right. I think what's wanted now is we shared our stories. We've all been, and it is traumatic. It's traumatic to listen to it. It's traumatic to participate, and you will know that more than most. But I think people now are saying, all right, practically speaking, what can we do? And for me, coming from my background, as I say, trade union organizer, daughter of a trade union organizer, I discussed this with my dad over the weekend, and we talked about it, and he was like, yeah, think about it. And he same as every time I talk to a union organizer, they remember someone from their own career whom they know may have lost their job or come close.
It has come out very strongly in favour ages ago, a year ago and more. Forza the same, ASTI the same. I mean, right across the trade union kind of landscape. And I can tell you that one of, a very male trade union, because of the area of work, I won't actually name them, but they actually chose Women's Aid as their charity of choice before Christmas. And, just something like that is so incredibly encouraging. These men, just said, right, we want to do our bit here. We want to signal to you that what you're doing really matters, and that we notice, and that we too are part of this struggle to try to eradicate. I know it's very difficult, but we really do want to eradicate or eliminate that violence. And it's violence which I'm sure, employers also are going to have an eye on the bottom line, and they're thinking, we need happy workers. We need happy workers.
You can quantify the cost, and actually in NUIG, and I want to pay tribute to Nat and the women in the Gender Studies and Women's Studies department down there for pushing this, but also to the college authorities for taking it on board. So this policy was brought in last May, in May 2021. This policy was brought in NUIG. It's coming in the rest of the universities now this year. We
Yes.
know Vodafone, Danske Bank. So, I mean, at this stage now, as politicians, we're nearly trying to catch up, right? A little bit like the repeal of the Eighth Amendment. You know, we were all sitting around here going, God, do people want it? Do they not? The people are miles ahead of us. They were like, not only do we want it, we want it yesterday, let's do it now. I think that when I talk to people, employers, workers, union organisers, activists, they're sometimes they kind of look at you and go, well, stop talking about it and just do it. You know, don't be telling me you might be doing something, just do it. And that's why tomorrow is an important day, because the legislation is getting to the next stage, which means it's on legislative journey, which I think is really important to say we will not let the sun go down on January without taking practical steps. And I hope everyone in the Oireachtas is going to get behind this, because it means that we can say not just that we feel it, but that we understand this is a practical issue for which women need practical support, and this is practical support. And believe me, this could be the difference between losing and keeping a job, and the difference between losing and keeping a job could be huge, because as that woman said to me this morning on social media, it was so much pressure. Just take that one worry. If we can do that, to take that one worry off and say, okay, whatever else is going wrong, you
job is a lifeline.
Yeah,
just
it is 100%.
Lifeline and the space that can actually work for a woman. I mean, I honestly can't, when I think of the Dáil in there, I can't see anybody speaking out against this. I really cannot. I think we have that the culture has changed very dramatically over all of that intervening period of time that I've been talking about, you know, all those decades. And I think there is now that general recognition. It's just sometimes that parliaments, not only our own parliaments generally, can be a bit slow, and they need to be given a bit of a push and to be told it's not, tomorrow is not good enough, now is the time. And heavens above, you know, we know that in Ireland at the moment, that now is, we have to move and we need to. And I believe that, of course, there will be other legislation coming down the line this year on in relation to violence against women, and that is more than welcome, welcome. And I know all will stand up and applaud and vote in favour, I'm hoping, with appropriate amendments to strengthen it all and so on. So I would say very best of luck now with the Health Committee tomorrow. It's another step, as you say, Louise, and personally I'm really, really appreciative and grateful that you're doing it. Can I also just speak admiringly, as I have personally, to you about your great colleague, Deputy Pauline Tully, who spoke out very movingly and very bravely about her own experience. I think I admire that hugely. It is very difficult to do. So well done.
It's very, very tough, and politics can be a tough business, and sometimes you don't get any, you don't get a pat on the back for coming out in the way that Pauline did, you know, but I think it was very appropriate, and I'm so proud of Pauline. I really am. I'm proud to know her, because she was absolutely amazing. And you know, I think when you talk to victims and survivors, and you know, they often come across as being so brave, and you know that they are, you know, that they've been through such a trauma and managed to come out the other side and speak, and yet all they talk about are others. When you talk to Pauline, she said, I was lucky, I'm still here. And you know, you see that in interviews. And they often downplay, but I think, you know, what we need to do is start the conversation. So same as with other pieces of legislation that relate to workers' rights, when they're brought in, they become the topic of conversation in the canteen. They become the topic of conversation, like the marriage equality referendum.
Yes.
I mean, that wasn't one. I'd love to think that was one off the back of a debate in the Dáil. It wasn't. It was one around kitchen tables in the canteen, people chatting at the water cooler, people chatting at the boardroom. And that's what I'm hoping will happen with this, that it will spark a debate, but also make people free to have that discussion and lift the stigma, because a victim or a survivor in a workplace environment, what happens is they don't talk about their home life, so somehow they become less of a person. And you stop asking, like, oh, there's Alva. Now, I asked her last week what she did at the weekend. She didn't tell me. I asked her the week before. She didn't tell me. Last week before. I'm not asking her again. I don't, you know, she's not going to answer. When in fact, if we can mainstream this conversation, give people the language and say, you know, the victim is not ashamed. The victim has nothing to be ashamed about. And you give that language to shop stewards, to workplace reps, to HR managers, to employers, to workers. You give that language to them, and then let those conversations happen organically. That will be as good as having the leave and having that statutory entitlement. If there is a dispute, or if you're nervous about asking for it, it's your right. It's not, please, I want to avail of this. So that's why, you know, that, and the time is now. We can't let January pass without us making a real, serious, significant effort. And that's what I'll be doing tomorrow at the committee. I'll be giving it my very best effort, and I hope that the members of the Equality Committee see it and will match it, and will be positively disposed towards it. And fingers crossed we'll get this done. I think it's past time. There's no point in saying we should have done it years ago. If it wasn't done years ago and it can be done now, let's do it. That's
exactly. Very best of luck.
Thank you very much. Thanks a million, Alva. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
And to you too, Louise.